Welcome to Lifelong Learning EduTalks, Insights in Lifelong Learning and Continuing Education. These sessions are organized in cooperation between DGWF, the German Association for University Continuing Education and Distance Learning, and UCAN, the European University Continuing Education Network. Together, we bring voices from across Europe who are shaping the future of lifelong learning. Each EduTalks offers a short and focused perspective on each country, whether there is a practical example or a reflection on current developments. My name is Monica Braun-Granström, and I'm from the University of Education Weingarten and Chair for International Affairs of the GWF, and I will be your host today. We invite our speakers to step right in and keep it concise, no long introductions, just clear insights and inspiration. Today, we will be talking with Lyndsey El Amoud from the University of Cork in Ireland. Thank you so much for joining us. We're very happy to have you here.
Thank you, Monica. Delighted to be here.
So we're looking forward to hearing your insights. So let's dive right into it. We will be looking at not only your university, but the role of continuing education and lifelong learning in Ireland, and what place would you say that continuing education and lifelong learning occupy in your university or your country?
I think lifelong learning is increasingly coming into more of a central focus, both in terms of a national context and in an institutional context. That being said, I think there's still a long way to go. I think there are a lot of things driving the current focus on lifelong learning. We're trying to respond to very fast changes in the labour market. There are demographic shifts occurring. We have the digital transformation, we have the green transition. So there's an awful lot of change in the world around us. And lifelong learning, I think, is being purported as one way of trying to address change. But within the Irish context, I would say that one of the big things we struggle with is a lack of a lifelong learning culture. It's something that has been brought to the fore in the last few years. The OECD came to Ireland in 2023 to do a review of our national skills strategy, and they called Ireland out for not having a culture of lifelong learning. So there's very much a perception, I think, in the Irish context that when you finish your formal education, whether that's your high school or whether it's your bachelor's degree or whether it's your master's degree, that when you finish your formal education, that's it. You're done with learning. You never have to return to learning again. Whereas we know how important it is to be learning continuously throughout our lives. So I think that's really a challenge that we have to grapple with in Ireland. So we can have all the provision, all the courses in the world from the provider side, but unless the public out there understand the importance of learning, then I think we're still facing an uphill battle.
I do see a change of mind there, but maybe we just have to, we have to continue communicating the benefits of lifelong learning and continuing education. So in your experience, what are the most significant benefits of lifelong learning for individuals, for society?
I think there are so many. I mean, I'm such an advocate for lifelong learning because of the benefits. I think on an individual level, there are the very practical things like career advancement, improved employability. You know, I've seen so many people who have been able to move on in their careers or who have been unemployed and have been able to find work. But there's also, you know, on a personal level, there's improved confidence, improved self-esteem. That focus on personal development really helps people to flourish. And there's also, I think this is becoming more and more important, it's the ability to develop skills in the areas of adaptability and resilience so that, you know, people are able to live in the dynamic worlds that we're faced with right now. And then I think lifelong learning really reaches into all areas of a person's life. So we have many learners who come back and do a course with us because their employer told them so, or they want to seek a promotion. So they're very much motivated by their career, but they don't realize the benefits that attending a course will have, and it will trickle into all the other aspects of their life. And often at our graduation ceremonies, I will have family members, husbands, wives, parents coming up to me and saying, oh, it's amazing the change we've seen in our husband, our wife, our son, our daughter. They came to do a course, but now they're more patient, they communicate better, lots of other tangential benefits. So I think on an individual level, it's just such an enriching experience. At a societal level, then there are, the economic impacts that governments are very focused on, things like improved productivity, improved efficiency, economic innovation, all of this helping to improve both national and even European competitiveness, which there's been a big focus on, particularly, I think, in the European context. So that's very much on the economic side. But I suppose where I really value the impact of lifelong learning is on the social side and the potential for lifelong learning to improve social cohesion, social inclusion, this idea of people from all different backgrounds learning together and having this shared experience and sharing their own prior experience and being able to learn about each other's lives. We have a very important program in my university, in my department, where we offer sanctuary scholarships to people seeking asylum. And we have these asylum seekers in courses with lots of other people who, and some who might have preconceived notions about migration, about asylum seekers, but then they get to meet someone and they get to learn their story and learn their history. And I think this peer learning experience and this learning together, it helps to break down barriers and to improve tolerance in our society, which I think we could all do a little bit more of. But also then I think as people get engaged in more and more learning throughout life, we're aiming for, a healthier, a more engaged citizenry. So people are learning more about, the green transition, or they're learning more about health literacy, and society itself then can become healthier. And we see this particularly around learning in the third age and learning for older adults. The longer people remain engaged in learning, it helps improve cognitive function and gives them a social outlet. So I think actually investing in education is a lot cheaper than investing in healthcare for older people, So I think that, for society, there are so many benefits of lifelong learning.
Yeah, I totally can confirm what you're saying. I mean, we see that in other countries as well. The benefits on individual level and societal level. And you have given some good examples of that as well. I think some practical, and the peer learning is very important there. Maybe you want to share a particular successful continuing education initiative in your country or in your institution?
So I think at a national level, one of the most successful schemes in Ireland has been a scheme called Springboard Plus. That's not to say that it's anyway perfect, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. But in 2011, after the last economic crash in Ireland, the government started the Springboard scheme. It was primarily a labour market activation scheme. It was to support people who had become unemployed quite suddenly because of the economic crash. And it was helping them to upskill or to reskill in a different area where, there were key skills gaps in the economy. So Springboard has been running since 2011. It has changed focus over the years as the economic context in the country has changed. So while initially it was very much targeted at those who are unemployed, over the last several years, it has morphed into an upskilling program for people in employment. That focus on unemployed learners is still there, and they're still the priority group under Springboard. But now lots of people in employment are able to access Springboard courses. So since 2011, there have been an average of 250 courses funded a year across almost 38 higher education institutions. So since 2011, there have been almost 60,000 places offered on programs within higher education institutions in areas of identified skill needs. These are part-time programs. They run no more than 12 months in duration, and they're funded by the government. So if you are unemployed, or if you have taken a break from the labour market for some time to care for family or whatever, you can receive 100% funding. So return to education doesn't cost you anything. If you are in employment and you're looking to upskill, you receive a 90% fee subsidy. So you only have to pay 10% of the course cost. So we have seen some fantastic outcomes from this scheme over the years of people who were underemployed gaining better employment, people who are unemployed finding their way back into the workforce. And it has been really, really successful. But as I said, it's not perfect. Because the scheme has focused on areas of identified skills needs in the economy, these are kind of the big national high-level skills areas, we're finding that there are lots of programs that are left outside of the scheme. And I can give you just one example from my university. We have a diploma in youth and community work that people take to become community workers or youth workers, really valuable contribution to society, working in their communities, trying to make things better. But courses like this aren't funded through Springboard. The Springboard courses are the big, the IT sector courses, the biopharma courses, and courses like this that work in communities and make a real difference on the ground are left outside. So we have a lot of people coming from marginalised communities who want to become community workers, who are motivated to make a real difference in the lives of the people living around them. But they have to find the money to pay for this course themselves. On the other hand, in Springboard, while there are, lots of people who really need the Springboard funding and it makes such a difference to them, we also see the Matthew effect in operation, whereas people who have qualifications are getting more and more and more, and others are being left behind, and the gap is just widening all of the time. So we have people coming on Springboard courses who are educated all the way to PhD level, who hold doctoral qualifications, but they're coming back to upskill in a small area and they get government funding. Whereas we might have a single mother, unemployed, wanting to become a youth worker, and she has to find the funding herself to pay for a course. So there still are issues. Springboard has been a huge success, and I don't want to take away from the scheme because there are lots of people who have really benefited from it, but it's not perfect.
You're addressing a very important issue there in continuing education, the framework condition. So let's have a look at that. So even if there are great initiatives, the framework conditions could be maybe improved. We will have a look at that. Maybe you could tell us what are the key national policies or funding models supporting continuing education in your country?
Yeah. So in Ireland, we don't have a national policy or framework on lifelong learning itself. It's weaved into a number of other national policies, like our National Skills Strategy, which comes to an end this year in 2025. So there'll be new National Skills Strategy published, hopefully, the end of this year or next year. And it's also weaved into our National Strategy for Higher Education to 2030. So in all of these documents, there are references to lifelong learning, the importance of lifelong learning, but it's quite couched in economic terms rather than the social dimension of lifelong learning. I think one of the advantages Ireland has had, and that has allowed providers in the universities like my own to be able to operate in this space, really has been our national framework of qualifications. From its inception, our national framework has included different steps along the way and smaller awards than bachelor awards that we see some other European countries have had a struggle, particularly now with the focus on micro-credentials, on how do these fit into their national framework. We have always had an award in our national framework called a Special Purpose Award. And that has really allowed us to be quite flexible in designing and developing new lifelong learning programs within universities. So that has been a help to us. In terms of funding, apart from the Springboard scheme, really people who want to engage in university lifelong learning in Ireland are self-funding and paying their own fees, or they are having their employers sponsor them. There has been a pilot scheme running for the last 2 years where the government have tried to fund some part-time education, because in Ireland, full-time undergraduate education is free. Students don't pay tuition fees, but part-time education is not treated on the same basis. There has been a pilot scheme running to fund some part-time programs, which is very much welcome. But again, the pilot scheme is very restrictive. So they're only funding major awards. And I think when you're talking about adults returning to education, particularly those who may only have a high school education, and it's taking a lot for them to even consider coming into education as a second chance student, signing up to, a part-time bachelor's degree, which may take 5 or 6 years, day one, is very, very intimidating. Whereas the learners in my unit might sign up for a 12-week micro-credential, and then they might sign up for a 1-year certificate, and then they might sign up for a 2-year diploma, and they will scaffold their learning to get to where they want to be. And we have had learners who have gone through that system and gone the whole way to master's and doctoral level. But with this new pilot in Ireland, these students won't be funded. So in my department, we have approximately 3,000 students who come and study with us every year, and none of them are on courses funded by this pilot. So again, it's good news that the government is looking at part-time education and lifelong learning, but I think it has to be done in quite a holistic way to not leave people excluded.
Yeah, maybe this holistic view should be a bit broader perspective, like on a European perspective. If we have a look, I mean, we do see some common trends, I will believe, in continuing education. You mentioned micro-credentials. Do you have some other, have you seen some other common trends lately?
Yeah, so I think there's definitely been a growing recognition of micro-credentials and this idea of stackable learning pathways. And every colleague I talk to around Europe is somewhat grappling with micro-credentials and how do we make them work. Again, in the Irish context, we were very lucky because our national framework qualifications actually allowed that. I think there's also been a focus on recognition of prior learning. And I think that's really important as well, to value the experience that people have in their lives from informal context, non-formal learning, and really valuing that in universities. And I don't think we've always been very good at that in universities. I think we get so hung up on formal learning and learning having to be in a very rigid ladder frame. And I think we have to value learning that happens in other contexts. Just because someone hasn't learned something in a formal classroom in front of a professor doesn't mean that the learning is not valuable. So I think there is a growing recognition of the importance of prior learning. Micro-credentials are definitely a trend. I think universities are starting to try and be a little bit more inclusive. I think there is more of a focus on the social dimension of lifelong learning. It's still small and definitely needs to be expanded. I think that's because the economic focus on lifelong learning through European policy has really kind of focused us in that dimension. So yeah, there's definitely common things that we're sharing. This new movement towards European universities and how all of that will translate for lifelong learning remains to be seen as well.
Which role does digitalization and the AI plays in shaping the future of continuing education in your country?
That's a very interesting question, and one that I don't really have an answer for because we're waiting to see how it plays out. I think the digital side of things really has allowed us to open our doors a little bit more. I think it has provided greater routes of access. So I'll give you an example. Back in 2019, for the COVID pandemic, in my department, we spent 6 months writing a business plan for how we were going to move 1 or 2 of our programs online over the next 5 years. COVID happened, everything is online overnight. And we were concerned about our adult learners and how that was going to affect them. But actually, being in an online space really worked for our online learners. So giving them that flexibility was really, really successful. So while pre-COVID times, maybe 15 to 20% of our courses would have been online, now we only have 15 or 20% of our courses that are fully in person. The rest are very much in a blended format. So I think the digitalization trend is definitely helping us to be more flexible. I'm interested in seeing where AI can take us. I think there's possibilities there around, supporting adaptive learning, giving us better learning analytics, helping us to customize curriculum a bit more. But I think we do have to be mindful of the digital divide, and not exclude more learners just because we're now moving in more of a digitalized world, and really recognizing that we need to bring people along the journey with us. And then I think, there's still plenty of ethical concerns around AI that we need to look at as well. The upcoming autumn seminar in Barcelona in November is going to be looking at this very theme of AI and lifelong learning. So I'm really looking forward to seeing if anybody has some answers around this or has some practical examples.
AI is a topic which we all are quite excited at, to see the possibilities, but also the challenges. So we will see what the next years will bring. I have the feeling we could stop. We could not stop talking. We could continue talking about these topics for hours, but we will have to be wrapping up for today. So one last question, maybe, what is your vision of the future of continuing education and lifelong learning in your country and maybe in Europe?
I would really like to see a shift towards mainstreaming lifelong learning. I think adult education, continuing education, university lifelong learning, whatever you want to call it, has up until now very much sat to the side in universities. It's a sideline activity. It's not necessarily seen as central to the mission. I think demographics are going to force the change in that. We are coming to a situation in Europe over the next decade or so where the bulk of our school leaver population is going to start declining. So if universities want to stay relevant, want to stay the size they are, they're going to have to start looking at a different audience. And who could that audience be? It's the, plus 25 age groups all the way up to 70s, 80s, 90s, because these are the people that are going to have to engage in learning throughout their lives. So I really think this idea of a lifelong learning culture is critical, both in Ireland, but across Europe more generally. And part of that then comes with trying to provide better access and supports for learners, no matter what their background is, and really trying to embrace the concept that lifelong learning is a right, and really supporting people to attain that right.
Thank you so much, Lyndsey. Very interesting. And I said we could continue talking about this. Maybe we'll catch up the next week at the UCAN conference, and we can maybe share the link to the seminar in Barcelona in November as well. But now I would like to open up the floor to questions, if there would be any, or questions, comments. I could turn off the recording as well if that is wanted. So yeah, opening up for questions.
So thank you for the inputs, for the information. I think the situation is the same regarding credentials, recognition of prior learning, are more or less the same in the European countries. My special interest is in recognition of prior learning, because in Austria we have the university law limiting a little bit access to postgraduate courses on a bachelor and a master level, because it's defining the admission criteria. They say, okay, you have to have, for my area, postgraduate courses and MBA master level, you have to have a bachelor degree to access a postgraduate course on master level. And you can only recognize lectures from other postgraduate universities or higher education institutions. So per interest, so the applicants who don't have this formal bachelor degree or master degree, it's very hard, and they have to jump over extra hurdle to gain access to these courses. So recognition for prior learning is really, really interesting for us. And I want to ask, do you have in Ireland some formal admission criteria
No,
or
so
how do you handle it?
yeah, it's each of the universities or the higher education institutions have autonomy to set their own
Okay.
entry criteria. So within my institution, I've been the lead on an RPL project for the last several years, and we have prioritized RPL for access. So in most of the programs across the university, where it's possible, where it's not precluded by, professional accrediting bodies, we have RPL for access as an entry route. My own father benefited from an RPL for entry route during COVID. My father left school in 1970 with a high school diploma, went straight into work, as many people did at the time. University just wasn't an option. He set up his own business, ran a very successful business for the next several decades. He employed 40, 50 people, had huge experience, acquired great skills, but always felt because he didn't have the piece of paper from the university that somehow he was missing something. So during COVID, he didn't have an excuse anymore. And I said, Dad, now is the time. Now is the time. And his experience was recognized and he went straight through to a master's program.
Yeah, that's especially in the MBA programs, we have a lot of interesting applicants which have in Austria called Lehre, so it's not high school diploma, but you have your minimum school years, and then you have 3 apprenticeships some kind, and you have a formal degree at the end. But that's not entry. It does not in Austria, it does not automatically give you entrance to universities. And there have, as you mentioned, persons who have founded companies who work on executive level, but then they have no bachelor and no master, and then do access to participate in MBA, who is with leadership and really, really good for them. We're now trying to promote recognition of prior learning, but there you have a special process. It's not so easy. It's starting on other universities. They have their procedures in place, but it's more on non-formal, and then informal is another level. So, okay, I have some courses outside of university. It's a lot easier to recognize them at you have 20 years of leadership experience.
Yeah.
So that's also...
It's a tricky space, and I think this is one of the advantages we have in Ireland. As I said earlier, we don't have a national lifelong learning policy. So in some ways in Ireland, policy actually lags behind practice. And because of that, we have more flexibility. We don't have very rigid policies, rigid definitions that tend to kind of tie people up in knots. And we've been lucky because of that.
And before the last amendment of the university law, it was also easier. But we have one in 21 and 23, and then it was some extra ways to go. For example, you have an MBA can have 90 ECTS, but if an admission criteria is not bachelor, the MBA has to have 120 MBA ECTS.
Yeah, I think so that comes back to the idea of a lifelong learning culture. If we're really bought into, valuing lifelong learning, and we're bought into the concept of holistic lifelong learning, then we need our policy makers to remember what they're trying to achieve. And what they're trying to achieve is facilitating learners to engage in learning and not actually put barriers in their way. So we need the learner to be kept at the center all of the time, and policy needs to have a learner-centric approach the same way our practice does. And sometimes I think policy is counterintuitive to what we're actually trying to achieve on the ground.
But then again, we have to say that in Ireland, you do have achieved many things especially in the last years. And don't you have, I recall some meeting with another Irish colleague, micro-credentials is now a fixed part of university continuing education. I don't recall the colleague's name, but do you have a link maybe you could share with us on the status on micro-credentials in Ireland?
Yeah, so for the last 5 years, there has been a national micro-credentials project underway, funded by the government under what's called the Human Capital Initiative, or HCI. So the microcreds project was looking at trying to build a national framework for micro-credentials. So I can add the link in the chat, but for anyone listening, it's microcreds.ie. But I will add us to the chat too.
And is also an idea to use micro-credential in connection with recognition of prior learning?
In what way?
So to
certify someone's prior learning.
Yeah. In the framework of a micro-credential.
Yeah, it is possible, and there are some other countries around the world that do that. New Zealand, I think, for one, has been doing it for quite a while. We haven't, in my university, we haven't moved in that direction with micro-credentials yet, but who's to say it won't happen in the future?
It would be interesting to follow this issue as well. Thank you so much, Lyndsey. Thank you so much for the link. I will post the link to the UK and Autumn seminar as well, because the topic on IE is another topic, buzzwords we need to follow. So I just would want to thank you again for taking part in the Lifelong Learning EduTalks. It's been very interesting. And then we will see each other next week in Lille.
Perfect. Thank you, Monica. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Recording stopped.